World Trade Center complex.
None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free.
German philosopher Goethe. The whole world saw it. Those jets flew into the skyscrapers. There were enormous explosions, and the fires brought the buildings down. We all saw it with our own eyes. Everybody knows it. I have heard this or similar refrains from numerous people as they look at you with this incredulous gaze that someone would even doubt that it happened as explained on the tube. However, there is more to this story than meets the eye, especially the eye that has been exposed to the filter of corporate television. Point 23. Construction on the World Trade Center buildings 1 and 2, that's north and south, was commenced on September the 11th, 1971. At 1,350 feet, they were two of the tallest and most famous buildings on Earth. One fact most people did not know is that they were engineered and built like the proverbial brick outhouses. These buildings were over-engineered to withstand major storms and hits from large airliners. They were built with 47 enormous interior steel core columns, together with 236 large exterior steel columns that were welded and bolted together with steel plates. Further, there were steel trusses which crisscrossed, making a mesh that connected every other exterior column. Plus, there was diagonal bracing and steel rods connecting the trusses. There were also corrugated pans with poured concrete on every floor, and all of this was anchored in a very deep and heavy foundation. Point 24. The buildings were architecturally designed to absorb energy and to sway in storms. According to witnesses who were in the building relatively near to where the planes made contact, the towers briefly swayed for seconds as intended. Other witnesses in the area said that the noise and blasts were significant, but the tremor felt at the time of contact was minimal. Point 25. Fact: no steel-structured building in New York, the United States, or in the world has ever come down due to fire. In the last 100 years, literally dozens of steel buildings have caught on fire and burned for long periods of time and have not come down. A good example is the Meridian Plaza in Philadelphia, a 38-story office building that in 1991 had a hot fire. It burned on 8 floors for 19 hours, and 3 firefighters died combating the blaze, but it did not come close to bringing down the building. In contrast, the World Trade Center North Tower fire lasted 1 hour and 43 minutes. And the World Trade Center South Tower fire lasted 56 minutes. The fires in both towers burned significant proportions of rubble, sheetrock, carpet, furniture, etc., producing lots of black smoke, indicating they were burning inefficiently and were relatively cool fires. Point 26. The facts. A. Steel melts at 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit. B. Jet fuel, when mixed in precise proportions with air, will burn briefly at 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. C. Because of the debris, carpeting, sheetrock, furniture, concrete, aluminum, etc., and lack of oxygen, the fire at the World Trade Center probably burned at 1,200 to 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit. Point 27. It must also be remembered that a significant portion of the fuel exploded outside of the buildings. The exterior columns were exposed to the air on 3 sides and would dissipate heat at a fast rate, and the beams and columns were coated with fireproofing materials. Point 28. The official story is the buildings came down at point of contact because the intensity of the fires caused the trusses to push out the columns. Yet, when one views the hole created in the North Tower by the plane, there are only relatively small fires, and the heat must not be excessive because you can see two people standing and staring out near the opening. Point 29. The top section of the South Tower began to tilt at approximately 9:59 a.m. At this moment, a large cloud of gray dust suddenly puffed out of the building. The 35 stories of the top section continued to tip to 23 degrees past vertical. At this point, the upper segment was hanging over the edge by approximately 65 feet. In frame-by-frame pictures, one can see the concentric and uniform mushrooming gray cloud rapidly expand to envelop the building. As this was happening, one can see debris being blown away from the building with an extremely powerful blast. The overhanging upper section of the building was then mysteriously shrouded and was never seen again. Then the whole building came straight down. Within an incredibly fast 10.4 seconds, the once mighty 1,350-foot tower was reduced to a pile of totally pulverized remains. Government story is that this building experienced a compression or pancake demolition caused from weakened trusses and weight from above. At first, this explanation sounds plausible, especially because this is what the television reports have told us time and time again. However, common sense would indicate that the center of gravity of the top section was not centered over the lower section. Thus, if there was a compression demolition of the building, it would not be uniform because the center of gravity was considerably off-center. Secondly, the severed top section that was tilting very much over the edge would fall somewhat independently. Third, this section would fall at a faster rate than the anchored lower section because it would not meet the resistance of the intact lower section. Fourth, the top and lower sections would break into pieces. They would not pulverize. None of these four things happened. Point 30. The complete demolition of the North Tower at 10:29 a.m. took only 8.1 seconds. The North Tower came neatly down upon itself, and its remains were equally powdered. Point 31. Facts are very stubborn things. According to the law of falling bodies, as originally put forward by Galileo and still accepted today by all scientists, as described in the World Book Encyclopedia under falling bodies, law of, the total distance traveled at the end of any specific time in a total vacuum is calculated by this formula. Distance being d equals 32.16 divided by 2 times time in seconds squared. If there is any resistance, then the speed and time of the falling body slows down in relation to this resistance. In the case of the World Trade Center towers north and south, we know that the towers were 1,350 feet tall. Thus, you would have this equation for the fastest time of total drop in a vacuum. 1,350 equals 32.16 divided by 2 times time in seconds squared. This works out to 9.1627 seconds as the fastest time these buildings could come down. This presents some very interesting questions because the World Trade Center South Tower came down in 10.4 seconds, and the World Trade Center North Tower came down in 8.1 seconds. Additionally, there was resistance, and plenty of it. The resistance was the massive lower sections of the buildings that were stabilized by over 250 major interior and exterior steel columns and thousands of steel trusses. This defies the laws of gravity. Thus, either the height of the buildings is inaccurate, the time of the falls is inaccurate. the scientific calculation that has been used for hundreds of years is inaccurate, or something pulled down these buildings at a faster rate. Check it out for yourself. Point 32. Remember the gray cloud that concentrically blasted out and down the imploding buildings and chased thousands of New Yorkers down the streets while covering the whole area with a sand-like substance? What was that stuff? It was cement and other materials that had been crystallized. Could the blast of jet fuel create this crystallization? No, because at full blast, jet fuel only expands at 208 feet per second. Could a compression demolition do this? No. There is not enough latent energy. The cement would crack and break, but would not pulverize. The only way the molecular composition of these materials could be so scrambled is if there were small-scale nuclear devices or there were high-tech explosives. Since there are no unusual readings of radioactivity that can be confirmed, modern explosives are the logical choice. High-tech explosives, such as RTX or C4, can expand at over 1,000 feet per second and create extremely hot temperatures. Modern explosives could cause the crystallization of the building materials while creating a vacuum that could pull down the buildings at a faster rate than normal speed and leave a residue of extremely high temperatures. Point 33. FEMA put forward this hurried and very short explanation concerning the collapse of the World Trade Center's north and south buildings.
Expansion of floor slabs and framing results in outward deflection of columns and potential overload.
From this expert opinion, the administration and media have aggressively promoted the pancake theory, which claims that the floor trusses expanded, which caused the columns to buckle, the joints to break, and the floors then compressed upon themselves. However, an objective observer would consider these important points. A. Never before has any steel frame building come down because of fire. The World Trade Center fires only burned for relatively short periods of time and at low heat levels. B. For the World Trade Center buildings to react in this way, literally thousands of super heavy-duty joints and welds would have to snap at precisely the same instant. Remember, these particular buildings were engineered for expansion and flexibility. There was also fire retardant sprayed on all of the steel, and the burning patterns were inconsistent throughout the floors. C. A pancake collapse could not come down with such speed. D. A pancake collapse would not have the latent energy to crystallize the building materials, to shred aluminum, or blast rubble to such distances. E. A pancake collapse would not create or maintain the astronomical heat patterns which were recorded and were monitored for weeks afterwards. Point 34. On September the 16th, 5 days after the attack, NASA flew a plane over the site to take measurements and to create a thermal surface map. In this period of time, hundreds of truckloads of debris had already been carried off, and firemen had sprayed millions of gallons of water on the smoking rubble. The results show that there were several hot spots with temperatures over 1,000 Fahrenheit on the surface, with one spot at the South Tower that recorded 1,377 degrees. Most of us noticed that the area continued to smoke for weeks. Since neither tons of jet fuel nor a compression demolition have the potential to create this type of heat, much less maintaining this heat for days afterwards, an impartial detective would have to conclude that there was another source for these extreme temperatures. Christopher Bolin of the American Free Press has also discovered that the steel columns at the base of the foundations, 70 feet underground, were melted. That would indicate that temperatures would have had to exceed 2,700 degrees. Hello? Is anybody in the predominant media, government, or law enforcement listening? Point 35. World Trade Center Building 6 is an important part of the puzzle. Shortly after World Trade Center Building 2 was hit, there was a huge explosion that appears to emanate from the center section of World Trade Center Building 6. Only later did the building catch on fire. It then burned for hours at a very hot temperature, and the fire was eventually put out. Again, an objective investigator would ask, A, what caused the building to explode before it caught on fire? B, after the center of the building had been blown apart and it had experienced a prolonged and intense fire, why did this building not come down like buildings 1, 2, and 7? Point 36. The facts surrounding World Trade Center Building 7, a 47-story building, are even more bizarre. World Trade Center Building 7 was built on top of a major electrical substation that housed 10 large transformers. Further, the landlord had allowed the tenants to install large diesel fuel tanks with a capacity of over 42,000 gallons to take care of emergency power generation in the building. Some of the major tenants in the building were Mayor Giuliani, who had built a $13 million control bunker in this building, the CIA, the Department of Defense, and the Secret Service. It seems quite strange that the mayor would build such an expensive bunker in a building that was on top of such potentially explosive tanks and transformers. Additionally, World Trade Center Building 7 was not reported to be on fire until 3 p.m. This is 5 hours after World Trade Center 1 and 2 had collapsed. These fires were relatively minor and had been burning for less than 3 hours when the whole thing came tumbling down at 5:25 p.m. It appears from pictures to be a totally conventional demolition. There were no huge explosions. The building walls fell neatly in on themselves, and the rubble was cracked and broken, not pulverized. It is of interest that neither FEMA nor anyone else made a report or even made a suggestion as to what had happened to this huge building that housed some very interesting tenants. Point 37. It is said that
Every picture tells a story.
And in the case of the seismic activity as documented by Columbia University Seismology Group, there are some very interesting stories. The South Tower registered a tremor of 2.1 and came down in approximately 10.4 seconds. The North Tower registered a tremor of 2.3 and came down in just slightly over 8 seconds. The pattern that is registered for World Trade Center Buildings 1 and 2 indicates a series of bombs were detonated in cadence, with the last explosion being the largest charge. The pattern as registered by the fall of World Trade Center Building 7 is significantly smaller in magnitude and is the signature of a conventional demolition.